With us to talk more about that is House Republican Whip Eric Cantor, who joins us this morning from Richmond, Virginia. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Well, I want to start with the issue of tax cuts and read you something that was in the New York Times over the weekend, written by David Stockman, who's a former budget director for the Reagan administration. It's a long quote, so bear with me. He says, quote, "The nation's public debt will soon reach $18 trillion. That's a Greece scale, 120% of gross domestic product, and fairly screams out for austerity and sacrifice. It is therefore unseemly for the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to insist that the nation's wealthiest taxpayers be spared even a 3 percentage point rate increase. More fundamentally, Mr. McConnell's stand puts the lie to Republican pretense that its new monetarist and supply-side doctrines are rooted in its traditional financial philosophy." Now, to be fair, the Democrats also want to roll back the Bush tax cuts, but just for the middle class. Aren't both parties here basically ignoring financial austerity by allowing tax cuts to expire at a time when we have huge deficits?
Well, Savannah, first of all, there's no question we got to do something about cutting the budget deficit. As Mr. Stockman points out, we are reaching dangerous levels. There are real decisions that need to be made. But I don't think anybody should or agrees, or not too many working Americans agree, that the way you want to cut the deficit is to increase revenues by hiking taxes, not when we're in a recession like this. Let's remember what these tax hikes are going to do. 50% of the people that experience a tax hike are job creators. Right now, there are millions of Americans out there looking for work, and I don't think many people would go along with the notion that somehow we ought to start taxing the job creators even more when we're still sitting at almost 10% unemployment. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, but in fairness, so these Bush tax cuts implemented in 2001 and 2003, do you feel like you can make a direct correlation to jobs created because of that, or was it simply sort of avoiding what at the time was a mini recession in 2001?
No, what we need right now, Chuck, is we need to focus on how we're going to get job creators back into the game of actually hiring people. As we know, the unemployment has been languishing, and millions upon millions of Americans are out of work. We cannot have that. And the only way we're going to get this economy going again is to put some incentives, create an environment where folks are settling down and say, hey, I'm going to put my capital at risk again and start creating jobs. You're not going to do that if you send the signal that you say to all the job creators, hey, we're just going to tax you even more. We're going to make it more expensive for you to hire people. How does that make sense? Now, listen, this doesn't take away from the fact that we need to cut the budget. But you've seen us, Chuck and Savannah, on the House floor every single week where House Republicans have taken measures to the floor seeking the Democrats to join us in cutting the budget. In fact, over the last 9 weeks, we presented $120 billion worth of budget cuts, but to no avail because neither the president nor Speaker Pelosi seem to want to go along with us.
Well, look, I mean, Democrats may not want to do spending cuts and Republicans don't want to touch taxes. Would you acknowledge, though, it may be a policy judgment you have made, but will you just as simply acknowledge that passing these tax cuts worsens the budget deficit problem? I mean, you can't deny that, right?
So, Savannah, let's look at it through the prism of the working families who are seeking jobs and the small business people who are creating them. It's not a tax cut they're looking for. They don't want a tax hike. And that's the situation, the prism through which these people are looking at it. I mean, come on now. You can't hike their taxes and expect them to create jobs.
I just was wondering if you had any dispute with the notion that it does exacerbate the deficit picture.
Well, what I said in the beginning is if you have less revenues coming into the federal government and more expenditures, what does that add up to? Certainly, you're going to dig the hole deeper. But you also have to understand, if the priority is to get people back to work, is to start growing this economy again, then you don't want to make it more expensive for job creators. You don't want to hike their taxes so that they won't hire people. I mean, that's the fundamental decision here. Do you want to make it more expensive for small business people right now? No, I don't think you do.
I wanted to move on, but I want to stick with tax cuts. Why not find a way to pay for it then? That's what I guess that's sort of there's a third way here, right? You know, we're having this debate. Should they go up? Should they not go up? Why not have the Republican proposal be, look, we want to keep these tax cuts in place, and here's how we pay for them right now?
Listen, again, it's the way you're couching it, Chuck. You know it's not a tax cut with small business people. It's a tax hike. How are they going to afford to pay for a tax hike? That's the real question that you got to ask. But listen, there's no question. We put on the table already $120 billion of spending cuts over the last 9 weeks. We can also do some other things. When the Republicans reassume majority in the House, we've got to go back and understand that the last time that happened in 1994, there were massive slashes in the congressional budget. We ought to add the White House to that, too, because you know that the White House salaries alone since 2008 have gone up by $4 million. That's inexcusable when the rest of the country is taking pay cuts or either out of work. You know, we've got a lot of work we can do. There's a lot of areas in the budget that we can cut. And frankly, the Democrats in the House have been unwilling, and the president has been unwilling to join us in doing that.
Congressman, I want you to get you to react to another critique of the Republicans from a conservative, from a Republican here. This was David Klinghoffer. He's a former editor over at National Review, and he writes this: with its descent into baiting blacks, Mexicans, and Muslims, its accommodation of conspiracy theories, and an increasing nastiness and vulgarity, the conservative movement has undergone a shift towards demagoguery and hucksterism. Once the talk was of neocons versus paleocons, now we observe the rule of crazy cons. Congressman Cantor, you're one of those that has been a preacher of bringing civility back inside the conservative movement. Do you have some issues with the way some of the rhetoric gets out of hand among some conservatives these days?
Well, again, Chuck, I don't know what that article or who is referring to what statement that has been made, but I am committed to the fact that our party and the conservative movement, you know, the way that we reascend to a majority in this country is that we you know, draw the line in the sand and say we're going to be a party of inclusion. And the fact that, and what unites most Americans is our commitment to those Jeffersonian principles of free enterprise and the right for folks to earn their own success. That's what brings Americans together. And in fact, that's why we're the destination for the best and brightest in the world and people seeking for opportunity. And that's what's at stake this election, Chuck, really. All right. Because what we've seen are policies being promoted by President Obama and Speaker Pelosi that frankly are beginning to chip away at that American dream, that are chipping away at the fact that you can make it here more than anywhere else, because what's happened is we've had such a huge expanse of government in Washington that it's beginning to take away the right and the ability for people to chart their own course and set their own economic future.
Congressman, we have to let you go, but there's a lot of inside the Beltway newspapers that love to write about your relationship with John Boehner. Let me ask you this, clear cut. If Republicans win the majority, are you supporting John Boehner for Speaker?
I support John Boehner for Speaker, and you know, you look at the difference now of what we're about as Republicans and what Democrats are about over the course of this August recess. I would venture to say that Democrats have gone into hiding, whereas John Boehner and I and the rest of our conference are out there taking our message to the people, talking about the specific things that they can expect if we're a majority, and we're frankly, Chuck, we're listening to people, and I think the Democrats have demonstrated they're unwilling to do that, and their agenda reflects that.
All right, Congressman Eric Cantor, Republican whip from Richmond this morning. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.